The following program is part 2 of 2 parts, each 90 minutes long. There is support material available at this website, including quizzes, handouts, and lecture outlines for all presentations. Consult the UCTV programming guide for the date and time that other lectures in the series will be shown.
Since the state of California obviously is very concerned about the amount of water used by agriculture in general, a few years ago they invested some money, good money really, and they come up with a very, very effective system, which is a model in the world for that matter. They developed a system which we refer to as California Irrigation Management Information System. I think you should all be familiar with that system, California, or CIMIS. How many of you have heard of this system before, by the way? A few. And how many of you have actually used it? Have you gone to the site and used it? Probably not. Okay. I think that would be something. I don't know if you're going to have a session on irrigation later or not, but they probably will talk about it. It's very important. What it is a network of, I think right now they have about 350, 400 weather stations throughout California. Most of them are in Central Valley. And it's obviously the main focus is for agriculture. But we have them in urban areas too. These weather stations can measure evapotranspiration based on various climatic conditions. Solar radiation, wind velocity and directions, and net radiation, and there are 9 of them. And based on that, temperature, soil and air temperature and so on, based on that, that machine can actually measure the ETO, or evapotranspiration, at that site. That information from all these systems end up here in Sacramento. Department of Water Resources have their center here to the CIMIS headquarters. And you can actually access that center anytime you want to using your internet, and find out what is the evapotranspiration, or ETO, from the closest weather station to your site. And use that to determine the amount of water you need. Now, it may not be really necessary for a homeowner, but you can imagine farmers use it all the time. Very effective. In the Bay Area, many of our large golf courses, cemeteries and so on, they use that information. In fact, most of the golf courses these days are probably most efficient than anybody that I know of. Most of the irrigation systems come as a package with its own weather station and automated system. So they have their own weather station like that, measure the ET, and based on that determine how much water is needed, and basically overrides the controllers, and they irrigate accordingly regardless of where they are. Toro, Rainbird, all the major irrigation companies have a system or a package like that. But you can use that. Rate of application. After you have determined how much water is needed, how long you should run the system, then there is another factor you have to consider, and that is soil variation. Soils do not accept water at the same rate, and oxygen for that matter too. Within the same neighborhood, lawns may have a totally different root zone mixes. Some of them are on just native soil, quite often heavy clay soil, and others could be heavily amended with organic matter or sand or something. So even if your climate is exactly the same, and you have done your homework, and your irrigation system applied, you have done all those things, if you don't pay attention to the type of soil you have and whether that soil can absorb or accept the amount of water you are running based on the information from that leaflet, then still you haven't done it. Water obviously moves easier in sandy soils than it does on clay soils. In fact, generally, if you compare a clay soil to a sandy soil, you apply 1.5 inches of water to a clay soil. First of all, it moves very slowly. Secondly, it probably will not go deeper than about 6-7 inches. Because as you know, clay soil can hold quite a bit of water. The same amount of water you apply to a sandy soil, or a heavily organically amended soil for that matter, so it's kind of a fluffy, that water can go as deep as about 23 inches deep. But the amount of moisture you have here is not the same as you have over there. Okay? That's why we tell people pay attention to keep the runoff to minimum. Especially if you're on a slope, you irrigate, the water that goes over here, it's gone. It's not going to be used by that grass. So even if you spend all your time on developing the irrigation regime based on what we just talked about, but half of that water is going into the street or the gutters, you haven't done it. That gives you the information about the water needed for this grass as long as it stays within those confines. So you have to pay attention to that. Or even if you don't have a slope, you irrigate, so the leaflet tells you, okay, run your system for 30 minutes every 2 days. And after 20 minutes, the water is standing everywhere and you have puddling. That's not good either. Most of that water is eventually going to evaporate. Grass is not going to use it. Whatever goes up in the air is not going to be used by plant. It's creating a very damp environment, very susceptible to traffic compaction. Soil is wet. Grass is not happy. There's not enough oxygen for at least a couple of hours for that grass. And you have provided a very nice, damp, cool, wet environment for a certain group of organisms which they love it. What? Fungi. And those are almost all the turfgrass diseases in California are caused by fungi. And they like that. They all need moisture. Now, they're very small ones. They're not mushrooms. Although you'll get mushrooms growing too in that case. So you want to prevent that. Not only because you want to reduce water waste, but also you want to provide a good environment for grasses to grow in. The best way you can deal with that is, in addition to determining how long to run your system, is to pay attention to this. So when you turn the irrigation on, after 20 minutes you see either runoff or puddling, turn it off. Wait until that water goes in, infiltrate into the soil, and that may take 10 minutes, it may take 30 minutes. Then turn the irrigation on again and finish the rest of the cycle. It's laborious, I know, but fortunately most of the new controllers, if you have irrigation, you know that they have a cycling system. You can cycle them, you know, you don't have to put that 30 minutes all in one shot. As long as the occasion cover all that, which basically means that 30 minutes you can do it throughout the day. You know, 10 minutes in the morning and wait maybe another 10 minutes a couple of hours later, something like that. Cycle it. So all the water actually goes into the soil. It's impossible to totally eliminate runoff or totally eliminate pond. I know that. I mean, realistically, that is not possible. However, the more of those things you do, the better it would be for the grass, and obviously you will not waste water. And of course, these days, the runoff, pollution, and things like that, we want to reduce that as well. If you have irrigated your lawn and 3 hours later you come and walk on the lawn and you see your footprints, there is something wrong there. Very simple. That water is not going in. Maybe heavy clay soil, but more importantly, especially in the backyard lawn, is compaction, traffic. And we'll talk about that a bit later, how to deal with that. But again, aside from relieving compaction, you also want to pay attention to your water cycling. Frequency, again, for most lawns really, twice a week should be adequate, but certainly not more than every other day, which is 3 times. Don't irrigate every day. Because what happens is that if you irrigate every day, then you keep the top quarter of an inch, half an inch moist all the time, and the rest of the roots can't get enough moisture, and some of them die. You create a good environment for diseases and weed invasion and things like that. We talked about uniformity, extremely important. Next time you fly in the summer, look down and look at all those large fields of grass. You'll see all these donuts or those patches. Now, in a situation like this, it really doesn't make a bit of a difference how much time do they spend and whether they get it from CMS, from there. That irrigation system is not working properly. That system is a failure. It could be because of the bad design or not enough pressure, which is the case here really, or maybe the wind is very high. So pay attention to that. And you have seen those on many fields that people, on a sports field. It's very important. All those irrigation heads, as soon as one of those players run over them, they can break them. And they have to be maintained on a regular basis. When you have a situation like that, for one reason or another, you don't have good coverage, then what happens? We're all humans. I would do exactly the same thing, and you would do probably. If you're in charge of this field, in the middle of the summer you have a situation like this, what would you do? If you were and your boss was on your back for not having a nice field, what would you do?
Green paint.
That's one thing, but yeah. Most of us will just run that system longer. Hey, if 1 hour is not enough, let's run it for 2 hours, 3 hours, to put enough water here to green them up. Easiest strategy. But what happens here around the heads? So that's why, especially on the sports fields, around the heads, you have seen those mud bowls. That's exactly what happens. Or something like that. You wait a little bit longer in the middle of the summer, the grass is all gone. On home lawns, of course, it's not as bad because you have, the area is not too large and you can actually maintain it. But one thing is, even the best irrigation heads, they leak a little bit. They always leak a little. And when they come up, if you notice when the head goes up, lots of water stands around them, which means that the grass around the head always gets a little bit more water. And therefore it grows faster. Now if you're mowing frequently, that's okay. But if, like me, you don't mow it as frequently, that grass around the head can grow very tall. And when you have that tall grass growing around those heads, they interfere with the flow of the water. The head pops up, hits the grass, then jumps over, and you get those donuts, dry areas around the heads. This is again common in home lawns. I've seen during the winter. We haven't been using our irrigation system. Things are growing, grassy weeds and so on and so forth, or they are broken. Next time you turn them on, that is the way they, obviously it doesn't make any difference whether you're talking about ET or anything else. If that area is not applying water uniformly, this area is going to go dormant first due to drought stress and eventually die. So maintenance of irrigation head, whether you want to get really fancy and do a real water audit, that's what they do on military camps, you can hire somebody to do that for you. But for a home lawn, you really don't have to be that precise. And then the last thing, which is very important, is that you want to irrigate when it's cool, and that's usually at night, early in the morning, I should say, and then when there's no wind. The best time to irrigate, if it's possible, is between 2 a.m. to 8 a.m. That is the best window. Pressure is high, temperature is low, so you don't lose much water due to evaporation. And most of that water moves into the soil, and at 10 o'clock, when the sun comes up, water evaporates from the leaves, and therefore you have reduced the chance of disease infestation. And obviously, you want to do it when there is no wind, because when there is a high wind, the irrigation is go everywhere. Okay, obviously, grasses, like all other organisms, they need water, obviously, and they need food. And it just happened that we are very fortunate in California, especially for you in the valley. We have really the best soil in the world as far as growing plants are concerned, because your soils are well supplied with almost all the nutrients needed by most plants, with the exception of a few which are needed by turf grasses, and for that very reason we have to pay attention to fertilization, which is a form of feeding our grasses. A few things again I want to cover in this area, because your handouts are very well supplied with quite a bit of information on fertilization, but a few things you want to be aware of. First of all, as you know, we have how many essential elements for green plants? Don't count them. Good, good, good. Those early days when I was pretty green and I was standing over here, how many essential elements we have? And they were like 1, 2, 3, 4, 16 and everything. So now I'm just trying. Anyways, there are 16 elements which are essential for all green plants. They're all not needed, not all of them are needed at high quantities, but they're all needed to some extent. And in fact, believe it or not, there is one other element which apparently is going to be added to that list very, very soon. Anyone know what that element may be?
Selenium.
No? It would be added obviously somewhere around here. Believe it or not, I didn't read any plant physiology. I read in Wall Street Journal from all places. Nickel. Apparently they have found nickel at very small quantities in many plants, and it is under review by somebody. I guess that is the Academy of Sciences or so on. And if they all agree, and of course that's going to take a while because they all have to write a few papers and get their brownie points and all, then it will be added to that. But anyways, it really has nothing to do with what we are talking about, because our grasses are basically, all they want is nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium in our area, because most of our soils are well supplied with almost all those elements. So practically, as long as we have nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, all the cooler warm season grasses we talked about, they should do fine. Now at times you may have some chemical problems with your soil, high pH or low pH. That's a different story. If everything chemically is okay in the soil in terms of fertility, those are the only 3 elements that you need to supply. And that's why all the turf fertilizers you find anywhere, whether it's a dry form, granular, or bottles, or liquids, or whatever they are, they all will have nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium in them. It just happened that most of our soils, again your soils around here, are well supplied with phosphorus and potassium too. There are a few of the soils, the green soils on the foothills, from what I understand, they may be deficient in phosphorus, but for all practical purposes, they are not really, it's not a kind of a crisis, and almost all the nitrogen, all the fertilizers available to us in the market have adequate amount of phosphorus and potassium in them. And really, for all practical purposes, the only thing you should be thinking about for lawns is nitrogen. Nitrogen. That is the material which is always deficient, almost always deficient in all the soils, and therefore you need to apply adequate amount of nitrogen. I'm not going to spend too much time on the type of fertilizers because you have another session all on fertilizers and so on, but very quickly for lawns, you can use your fast acting types, ammonium sulfate, ammonium nitrate, and so on, or you can use your synthetic slow release ones, IBDU, urea formaldehyde, and also you can use some of the organic fertilizers. Practically, however, what I recommend to people is that don't pay too much attention to the names and the fancy. The cheaper the better, really, because really all we want for lawns is nitrogen, and there is no reason to spend lots of money for very fancy fertilizers while your grass is going to use only nitrogen. There are many great fertilizers in the market, different sizes, different colors, different coatings, whether it's polymer coated, 3 polymer coated, sulfur coated. Those are all great, but they are primarily for a specialty type of grasses, golf greens, lawn bowling greens, sports fields, and so on. So for lawns, basically, as long as you stay with the simple materials. Even some of the new composts that we have available, if the material is well composted, and if you are composting in your own backyard, and you are confident that you have composted, and you all know that word has a specific meaning. You're not talking about throwing some plant there and as soon as they rot a little bit, that is compost. Unfortunately, many people think that way. But if you have done proper composting, temperature and so on, and you have killed all the weeds and disease organisms, and the material is really have been decomposed, there's nothing wrong with using that as a form of top dressing on your lawns, and accordingly fertilize a little bit too. Understanding that all compost or all organic fertilizers are fairly low in nitrogen, maximum 4 or 5% nitrogen and something like that. As long as you know that, and then we talk about how much are needed, then you have to pay attention to make sure that the grass receives what it needs. A material like this, obviously, if it's 5% and you want to apply 1 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet, you will need 20 pounds of that per 1,000 square feet. And that may be enough to cover some of the grasses totally. And that's not practical. In fact, in large areas where they apply compost to the lawns as a soil amendment, conditioner, or fertilizer, they apply it at very, very slow rates. It's not a matter of putting so much material on to cover all the grass. Because the amount of nitrogen needed by grasses is very important to know. And I'll give you a table, and you already have in your handouts how much nitrogen is needed by grasses. The best thing, of course, you always have to say this. If you're really unsure, you have bought a new property, you have moved from another area to here, you're not, plants are not doing well, one of the best things you can do is to have your soil tested by a laboratory, which is licensed to do that, agricultural laboratory, and they will give you some recommendations. They'll tell you whether you have any kind of a deficiency or not. And that's probably more important for other plants than it is for grasses. But we always say that that is a good thing to do. Majority of people don't do it and probably don't even need to do it, as long as the soil has not been changed too much by either too much organic matter or other amendments. Most of our native soils are okay. And if that is fine, then this is the recommendation for nitrogen we have for various types of grasses or sites. For home lawns, cool or warm season grass, annually you don't need to apply more than 4 to 6 pounds of actual nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. Okay? That is annual per 1,000 square feet. Now you can imagine if supposedly you are applying 4 pounds to your tall fescue, and you apply, if you use compost or any other organic type of fertilizer, which by the way, there is nothing wrong with them, and if you want to go that way, that's actually environmentally better. But in order to get 4 pounds at 5%, you will need 80 pounds per 1,000 square feet of those materials. First of all, you have to consider the cost. And of course, if the cost is not an issue, is that how much of that material you can apply in one application. Obviously, you want to apply them at a small quantities, so they won't cover the grass. For Bermuda grass, for example, you can go to about 6 pounds of N per 1,000 square feet. Okay? Timing, best time to apply your fertilizer for cool season grasses is fall and spring. In fact, if you want to think about 4 applications a year, which we recommend, and at each application we don't recommend you apply more than 1 pound of actual nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. That will give you 4 pounds per year. One application can be done on September 1st, another one at about October 15th. So that will be for your fall. Another application on around March 1st, first couple of weeks of March, depending on rain and everything. And then another application maybe April 15th, last 2 weeks of April. The reason we recommend applying fertilizers in fall and the spring is for cool season grasses, that during that time of the year, soil and air temperature is just right for root development. As the temperature rises, you get more foliage growth and not as much root growth. Obviously, you don't want to put fertilizer just because you're not growing a crop. You don't want to just put lots of. So you want to do it when plants can use it and develop a root system. And if the grass, for example, in the spring develop a deep root system, goes into the summer, considering the heat and drought stress, it'll be able to deal with that much better than if you wait until you put your fertilizer down in the middle of the summer, July, August, which I don't recommend you fertilize at all. Then during that time, what happens is that most of that nitrogen will be used up, grass will green up and it will grow, but all that growth will be at the expense of your roots. Roots are limited, shoots are growing, they need more water, they need more nutrients, roots cannot produce it for them. It's another stress on the grass, okay? Be very careful, especially during the summer, if you want to apply some fertilizer, and that may be needed sometimes. If, for example, you have not applied fertilizer adequate amount during the spring, and the grass looks a kind of a yellowish, malnourished, and you still want to put some fertilizer down, do it at a very, very small rate. Maybe about 1/4 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. That will be adequate for you to get some greening effect, but not much growth. And be very careful what you apply. Some fertilizers, like urea, or anything has urea in it, they have a very high burning potential, as you may know. In the middle of the summer, you put on your lawn, especially at high rates, you can kill the lawn very simply. Just burn it. Has happened to this golf green, and I don't know if that superintendent ever went back to that job or not, but it can easily happen. So during the summer, be careful about what you apply. Now, for your warm season grasses, those of you who have Bermuda grass, you can apply fertilizer throughout the year. As long as the grass is green, Bermuda will love you for that. No problem. But generally, we recommend about half a pound of actual nitrogen per 1,000 square feet per growing month on Bermuda grass. Technique, very important, very much like irrigation. You know, every time, sometimes when I talk to people and they say the word lawn, you get a feeling that they're talking about a plant, you know, like a tree, a lawn, like the whole thing is one organism. It's not like that, you know. Every lawn is, we're talking about at least millions, maybe billions of individual plants growing next to each other. And if you are a fair owner, you have to treat all of them equitably and fairly and uniformly if you want to have a nice lawn. If you put too much water there, not enough here, it's not going to be a good lawn. The same thing goes for fertilizer, which basically means that a good technique is the one which will apply fertilizer as uniformly as possible all over the lawn. Will treat each one of those individual plants uniformly and equally. Many of us have this type of fertilizer applicators. We call them drop type fertilizer applicators. Many of us bought them a few years ago when they came to the market. And many of us have them hung in their garage. They're rusting and everything. And nobody wants to get rid of them. Have you noticed that? Who is going to use them? Anyway. And they're great. They work very well as long as they are not rusted, like most of us. They put the fertilizer down in an area, a swath between the two wheels, obviously. They can be calibrated very nicely and so on. The only problem is that most people are in such a great rush to do it that they forget that, again, that uniformity I was talking about. For example, this lady who lived a long time ago. long time ago. Probably was in Berkeley too, I don't know. What, 50s, 60s? I wasn't alive then, I don't know. Anyways. These have become fashionable again. Have you noticed that? Yes. Some of us have taken it out of the storage area. We wear them again because we want to be hip, you know. Anyways, and those headscarves, probably now after the whole Afghanistan thing, the whole fashion is going to change a little bit. Anyways, when this lady who is using one of those earlier Scott's fertilizers, when she's fertilizing, look at, she has slippers on, you know, these days she has them. Goes all the way to the end of the lawn. On the way back, if she does not overlap, then she will get something like that. And that can easily happen, obviously. So that's a technique. When you fertilize, you don't want to wait and say, oh, I have 5 minutes left, I can go on fertilizer lawn. Just go and grab it, run all over the place. Because you can't see any of those granules. Yeah, nothing is going to happen, but a week later, you're going to see that. You know, the zebra effect, we call it. So for that reason, these days, we think that especially for larger areas, these machines are probably more appropriate. The broadcast applicators, you all have seen that, those red, these days green, the whirly birds type, you know. They broadcast the material. And the way they work, as you know, the material drops into this little propeller, which spread the material like that. So you really don't want to stay within one line, and it reduces the chance of having that zebra effect. Although you can do the same thing with these too if you're not careful, you know. But they're easier to work with if the area is not too large. Your hands is probably the best applicator. That's what I do. There's nothing wrong with that. These materials are dry. They are not, unless if you have pesticide in them, which I don't recommend. You can do it, or wear gloves. And the best is just take it out, and you feel much better. You all kind of connect you to the grandparents, you know, in the farms and everything. You just do it. It feels good, and do it uniformly. But if you are using those, be very careful. There are some materials in the market, namely weed and feed type stuff, and other fertilizers with some kind of a pesticide in them. If you use those, for example, if this lady was using that and she gets too close to those areas, and some of those get into your flowers, vegetables, or anything else you have. Remember, most of the herbicides for lawns, they work the opposite way for other plants. especially if you have a broadleaf killer in your lawn fertilizer, it will kill all the broadleaves. It doesn't say, oh no, that's a tomato, I shouldn't touch that. No, it doesn't matter. They will do that. So be aware of that fact, and make sure you want to stay within that. Let's see. All fertilizers are salt. Very simple. And salt kill grass. Good equation, remember that. Which means that if you do not apply fertilizers at the rate recommended, the time of the year that we recommend, and so on, you can easily burn these grasses. And that happens often. I see people, and I'm driving my car, and I see this guy has his applicator out, and he has the fertilizer right on the lawn, and he's pouring like 50-pound material on. First of all, the danger of the spill is very high. And then what happens is what happened over here. When you open that little gate, at the beginning, a lot come down, And we don't think about it. You should be moving when you open that little gate. So as soon as you do that, whoosh, you get probably 10 pounds per 1,000 square feet right in that area. And then they start moving again. It has happened to all of us. It happened to me too, and some of you know. What usually happens when we see something like that? We either don't notice it, or if we notice, what do we do? I know. What do we do? Not we should do. Nobody's watching. Let's go on. No problem. Pretty much like when you spill something on neighbor's carpet. You don't do that, but many of us do. Anyways, so it doesn't matter. That thing is not going to go all over the place. They're going to be staying there. Next time you irrigate, that fertilizer is going to dissolve very slowly and gives you a good, thick brine of salt, which is going to kill the grass. And as it's moving, it just kills more grass. Direct effect of salt. If it happens, obviously the best thing would be, don't feel bad, forget about your ego and everything. You just try to pick up as much of it as you can, and then yes, flood it with water. Not just a little bit, to wash it off. Better yet, put everything on the in your machine on the driveway, someplace that you can sweep if you have that problem. And then start moving. As soon as you get in the lawn, then open that little gate, so you don't have a big spill. Now what happens when you kill the grass with fertilizer usually is you kill the shoots, leaves and so on. Quite often roots are not affected. So after you have killed the grass, it's going to look bad for a while, and then eventually grass is going to green up, and then in that area you're going to have this big clumps of green grass for the next 10 years. Which is going to be another problem. Then what do you do? Those of you who have dogs, you know what I'm talking about. Dogs and lawns, that's always something interesting. Anyways, as you probably noticed, dogs, they burn the grass, they urinate, and then the grass dies, and then 3 weeks later, all of a sudden everything greens up, and you have all this nice green grass. Mowing. Okay. That is the fun part of having a lawn, isn't it? Just like tax and death, it's going to come. Once a week we have to do it. Rain or shine, it's going to grow. Well, not in that case, obviously, but it's something that, most people like to have a lawn, and they just don't want to deal with that. It's a pain. Others like it, like myself. When you mow your lawn, say in July, late afternoon, you've mowed the lawn, the smell of that freshly cut grass, it's amazing. Have you noticed? They're looking at me, what are you talking about? It's good, especially if you have a glass of wine or something. You just enjoy it. July, Sacramento, maybe not. I'm talking about it. But basically, it's something that some of us like and others don't. And for some of us men, it's one way to show up, we can mow the lawn. Nothing else we can do, we can mow the lawn and everything. However, in order again to have our lawn happy and good looking and everything, we have to do that. Even that one the correct way. Again, you have the whole booklet on that, on mowing lawn and everything. You can review lots of information. But let's touch on some of the more important aspects of it. Height of cut. is the first thing you have to remember. The most important part of having a lawn is at what height you need to cut these grasses. By now, you should know that these grasses are not the same. In fact, the difference physiologically between a bluegrass and Bermuda grass could be as big of a difference as you would see between an apple tree and an orange tree, really. But most of us don't think of it that way because everything is grass. It's just green as grass. It just means the same way. And it may be okay unless you want to have a healthier lawn. And of course, one aspect is to have the right height of cut for them. You have this table in your handouts. Some of these grasses, such as bluegrass, ryegrass, between 1.5 to 2.5 inches. We recommend for tall fescues about 2 to 3 inches. Some of the new dwarf type you can probably go to 1.5 inches. 1.5 to 3 inches. Some other grasses, for example, bent grasses. Those grasses grown on golf greens around here, they're all bent grasses. They are mowed on a daily basis at 3/16 of an inch, which obviously require a special mower. I mean, your mower that you and I have in our house does not mow that like that. And it just happened that that grass can take that. And that's why they use that grass for golf greens, tennis courts, and things like that. But the ones that we are using for home lawns, as I mentioned around here, and that is the height of cut you want. Bermuda grasses, 1/2 to 1 inch, really, that is the height of cut you want. You don't want to go lower than those rates because, depending on the species, at very low height of cut, at the bottom, at the lower portion of the grass, genetically they don't produce enough chlorophyll, or they do not contain as much chlorophyll at the base of the grass. When you mow the grass very short, you have noticed kind of a yellowish. And when you cut that grass that short, it chokes the grass. There's not enough, again, chlorophyll, and therefore grass cannot produce as much food, and it cannot recover as fast from mowing. Mowing is it's not something grasses are looking forward to, believe it or not. They are not thinking about, oh, that's so good, I'm going to be mowed tomorrow or something. They hate it. If you're even thinking about, don't do that, because every time you do that, they're cutting their limbs. Oh, don't do that. So and you want to do it the right way. So make sure you do it. Make sure that afterward they can recover, and that's stay within it. And if you mow it very higher than that, then you lose density. The grasses we have for lawns, they are different type of, wheat and barley would not make a lawn for you, because if you mow those a couple of times, they will die, although they are annual anyways. But even some of the perennial grasses, if you mow them, the main reason is that if you mow them often, they do not have as much chlorophyll, and they just simply die. Grasses we use for lawn purposes, they have been bred or genetically are adapted to this. For example, they are primarily from areas of high grazing. So over centuries, they have developed that characteristic. Now in these guys, if you let them grow too tall, all the energy will go into making that primary stem longer, and therefore they will not have to produce more tillers. So your lawn will not look as dense. So you want to stay within that range. And that is the height of cut that you set your mower at. Whatever mower you have, the manual will tell you how to adjust the height, okay? And you want to do that. If you do not have the manual or doesn't tell you, the best is that if it's a real mower, and I'll talk about that, you put them on a concrete area, on a flat surface, and get your ruler on 2 sides from the bed knife, that is the flat one at the bottom, and set it at that, and tighten the screws. On your rotary mowers, which is, I guess most of you have those, that is the height from the tip of the blade from the concrete. Okay, so you can measure it that way. It's not from the lip of that little housing, because that is always lower than where the blades are. Safety factor. How often do we need to mow? That is one of those questions that my answer is very simple. I really don't know. Because the frequency, how often you need to mow the grass, depends on how fast your grass is growing. If you're over-fertilizing or over-watering, or the environment is just great for the grass and the grass is growing very fast, you have to mow it more often than your neighbor who may not be doing all those, and the grass is growing slowly. We have a rule of thumb in mowing, and that is that you should not remove more than 1/3 of the shoot length after each mowing, okay? Which means that if you have, okay. Which means that if you are, if for example your grass is tall fescue and you have decided to mow it at 2 inches, you can allow that grass to grow to a height of 3 inches, mow it then at 2 inches, remove 1/3, which is 1 inch, and then wait until that next thing happens. Now, I don't expect all of you to go and have a ruler every time you want to measure your lawn or something. Nobody's going to do that. But if you do it at least a couple of times during the season, you would have a fairly good idea of how often that lawn needs to be mowed. Not necessarily because you're going to change your habit of mowing once a week. I'm not going to do that. Just because my grass is growing more, I'm not going to say, okay, last time I mowed it was on Saturday, now it's Thursday afternoon, I should do it. Nobody's going to do that. We mow the lawn once a week because the weekend comes at the end of the 7 days, and that's what most of us do. And no matter what anybody does. But if you do your measurement and you think you're removing too much grass out, you have to change something else. Maybe you're putting too much water on. Maybe you're putting too much fertilizer on. And accordingly, your grass is growing faster. Regardless, that's a rule of thumb, but you don't want to do that. Grass grows exactly. Did you all hear that? I was doing this once and say, yeah, balding. I said, no, scalping. People cannot think of the time. Anyways, you don't want to scalp your lawn because obviously nobody likes to be scalped, and grasses are not an exception. If the grass has grown too tall, either because it was raining, or the mower was broken, or I don't know, that Saturday 49ers were playing or something, I don't know, there's always a reason for that. You don't want to just come down next week and just shave off the entire grass off, because then you don't want to wait another month to mow. Because what happens again, at this point, you're removing so much of that chlorophyll, what you end up with, which we call verdure, by the way. Clippings is what you remove. Verdure, you have terms for all these things, is what is left afterward. There's not enough chlorophyll there, and therefore the grass, as you see, it's kind of a yellow. It's going to take a while. You know, you do that a couple of times, okay, grass is not going to die. But if that is the habit, then gradually what's going to happen is you're going to see all those weeds, different grasses start coming up. And in about 2 years, it's all weeds. It's not the grass anymore. If for any reason the grass grows that tall, then you probably have to mow a little bit more frequently for 2 or 3 times. And at each time, remove that 1/3. So gradually, you lower the height of cut. And as you do that, the lower portion of the grass will, under ideal conditions, develop or produce more chlorophyll, and that will be okay. Oh, what do we do with clippings? Well, believe it or not, California, like many other states, is dealing with a crisis. Although it's not as bad as it is as it was used to be about 6 years ago. At least we don't talk about it as much. We are running out of our landfills, dumps. We don't have as much place to put our garbage in anymore, or very soon you'll probably run out. In fact, all the studies that has been done shows that within 15 years or so, pretty much all our landfills will be full unless we do something about it. And fortunately, we have done something about it. In fact, about 10 years ago, or 5 or 6 years ago, when the green waste or solid waste legislature, the bill 939, am I correct, Ken? 939 was passed, which basically requires all the municipalities to reduce their waste by 25% by 95, and 50% by the year 2000. That has helped quite a bit. In fact, many municipalities have actually reached that and have done better than that. And whoever hasn't done it, and Ken's office know about that, he works for Integrated Waste Management, they are on their red list or black list, whatever one of those lists. Anyways, I think we have done a very good job. Am I correct? How are we doing statewide, by the way, on that?
I think the latest number is about 42% overall.
Overall, for 2%, we have
We're
a...
at 55, 60, somewhere at 30. It's kind of
Okay. That's good, isn't it?
very good.
My feeling is that at the beginning, nobody thought we were going to get there. So we have done a very good job, and obviously we have to continue doing that. And one of those things is grass clippings. Up until a few years ago, a big portion of that used to end up in landfills, totally unnecessarily. Those clippings, that's a good resource. There's no reason to throw them out. In fact, we have done studies, and we know that a big portion of that is water. Easily 75% or more of clippings is water. Why do you want to carry all this water from these neighborhoods all the way to a landfill and put it there? And the rest is what? Dry matter, which is nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and so on and so forth. So, although grass clippings are fantastic for composting, as you all know that, and if you're composting, you know that really you need that, the green material, and of course the brown stuff. But what we recommend right now is to, if you are not composting, whether at backyard or larger scale, unfortunately most of the green waste these days are being picked up from our houses and somebody composts it. If you don't want to do that, and in fact I recommend you probably go an easier route, that is for other things, is to grass cycle. I gave all of you that brochure about grass cycling. It will tell you everything you ever want to know about grass cycling. We have included information on our lawn management leaflet. It's a kind of a sexy term for a very old practice. Means that leave the clippings on when you mow. It's nothing new. We didn't invent it or anything like that. In fact, golf courses have been doing that all the time. They do it all the time. They can't afford taking all those clippings out. But it's primarily homeowners, industrial parks, commercial parks, or so on that people, I don't know why, they always have to remove it. And I always say, leave them on. It's water. Of course, that doesn't really amount to that much, but it's primarily the nitrogen and phosphorus and potassium in it, and they decompose and they basically return nitrogen to your lawn, and it's good. Grass cycling, however, is effective if you do it the right way. If you follow that rule of thumb of not removing more than 1/3 of the grass clippings from your lawn at each mowing. Or, better yet, mow frequently enough so after each mowing you don't have a crop of hay on the grass. Now, something like that, it's not going to be effective grass cycling, and that's not really what we recommend. Best grass cycling is that you really don't see many clippings afterward, and that comes with frequent mowing. If you have something like that, next time you irrigate, all those clippings are going to bunch up, going to hold the moisture for a very long time, smother the grass, cut the light. A few days later, if you remove those clippings, you'll notice that some of it has lost chlorophyll. As you know, most green plants in dark lose chlorophyll, as you know that. And quite often, if you take some samples, you'll find that some disease organism has taken advantage of that damp environment and has infected the grass. So if you can't do grass cycling correctly, well, don't do it at all, really. And if once in a while, for whatever reason, again, because you didn't mow frequently and so on, and you have lots of clippings, that is the good material for your compost pile. Or you can do a little bit of this, a little bit of that, put some of it in your green waste to go to the composting. But basically, if you can leave them on, that's the best way to deal with at least that part of our solid waste. Mowers. There are several types of mowers in the market. Some of them are a little bit elaborate. Obviously, we don't recommend that. Don't try that at home. It's not a very easy one. But the lawns, for home lawns, the main ones that we use are two main categories. One is this type, which is called a reel mower. This happened to be a golf green type, but the home type, all the push types are the same type. And by the way, that's great. I see so many people are buying these new push types, which are kind of easier to use. Great exercise. If all the people in this country who are paying so much money for those treadmills and all those machines go up and down, hey, throw all those away, buy one of those push type mowers and mow your own lawn, the effect would be much more noticeable, believe me. But no, that's work. That's not exercise. We don't want to do that. But anyways, those guys are good. If you keep the blades sharp, Obviously, they are motorized too. I mean, you don't have to have the push type. They do a very good job. They're a little bit more expensive than the rotary ones, and adjustments are a little bit more sophisticated, and maintenance a little bit more complicated. So for all practical purposes, majority of our homeowners have this type, rotary type, which is that blade that, you know, turns, and as long as you keep the blade sharp, it'll give you a very nice cut, and that's obviously something that you have. The old types will always have a place that you can put your, you know, the bag that catches the clippings. But fortunately these days we have mulching mowers or recycling mowers, very, very good ones, very effective ones. And you can always say that that little bag is missing there. Exactly the same machine, it just happened that this one recycled or cut the clippings to smaller pieces. Let me have a picture. We have ride-ons too. They have different mechanisms. You know, some of them have little appendages, others have extra blades, doesn't matter. But basically what they do is they mow the grass, they cut those grass clippings to smaller pieces, so therefore they will not show on top of the grass as much, they will decompose and dry up much faster. And also some of them, the better ones, have a mechanism, they actually blow that grass into the turf canopy so they don't stay on the top. So if you're in the market for a new mower, I highly recommend you purchase a recycling or a mulching mower. Now, I'm not expecting you tomorrow to go and get rid of the mower you already have and buy a new one. Think about the amount of waste that's going to make, you know. Of course, Chinese will love you for that because they like all the this metal, you know. They can make newer ones. But no, if you're in the market, buy a new one. But mulching mower, and they are very effective, and you'll be happy on the grass. What is wrong with that picture? The wheels came off from that. I don't know why I have that one. Have you ever seen a mower with no wheels? That one, I don't know. Well, believe it or not, there is a mower with no wheels. Fly mow. Some of you may have heard the term, and there are a few other ones. These mowers are actually for special areas, you know, areas when you can't have wheels because wheels will get caught in those mud. I don't recommend it for homeowners. They're a little bit more difficult to maneuver. But when it's down, it basically works like the hovercrafts, you know. It actually makes, as the blade turns, it just floats the mower on top of the grass, and you don't really need the wheels. And it is fantastic for areas hard to cut, something like that. But for a home lawn, it could be dangerous. Sometimes it may easily come on top of your foot or something. So the reason I show that is that don't buy one of those for a home lawn. I don't think they're safe enough. Technique, same thing. Do it fairly, equitably, and uniformly. Treat them all fairly. That's all you want to do. Few other things on slopes. Again, these are some safety issues. That's what I'm talking about. I've seen people, they have a lawn, and you know, they push up, go up, and then they run behind the mower coming down. It's dangerous, you know. The best way to mow the lawn, especially if you have a slope, is across the slope, not up and down. Now, I don't want to get too fancy because then it gets, that is, the technique is okay as far as mowing the lawn, but that is not safe. Don't do that. In fact, the reason I show that always is that if the area is so steep, you shouldn't have a lawn there. That's very simple. Although this is it's not really a home lawn. But basically is that, again, if you have a very steep slope, plant something else. It's too difficult to maintain. Water is not getting into the soil, fertilizer runs off. Managing is very hard. Why bother? Put something else there and have your lawn in the rest of the area. In very slopey areas, scalping can be a problem. You know, these mowers, depending on how large they are, they will scalp them. So maybe in that area it's very simple. Just raise your height of cut half an inch or so. Everything is going to be a little bit half an inch long, but at least you won't have this scalped area. Or mow more frequently. Oh, this was a very interesting one. A few years ago I was at this very high caliber scientific meeting. We had gone actually to see that Ziegfeld and Roy in Las Vegas. But anyways, and of course my friends, you know, after the meeting was over, and I'm not into gambling or so on, and everybody was just putting their money on that casinos, and I just took my camera and started walking around and see what's going on in Las Vegas. This is just one block this side of Strip, which is where the casinos are. There's a water park. Some of you have been in Las Vegas, you know where it is. So I was walking and taking pictures of different things. Of course, everybody would see me and think the guy is crazy or something. Or maybe he has been doing something, or taking pictures. But I saw this one, which is very interesting, and I always talk about that because I just like people who think. This is a parking lot over there, obviously. And as you know, in Las Vegas, like many other desert areas, although they don't get much rain, but once in a while they have this very intensive rain for a short period of time that causes flooding, you know. And in the city, you probably have seen lots of these flood control channels made. So they had all this street or parking lot, and they had very nice flood control channels coming from every which way, which would bring the water to this swale, and everything would go down to a drain and someplace, I don't know where. And of course, again, that is one of the advantages of grasses, because grass can hold the soil in place. Also, grass can keep many of these sediments and pollutants in place instead of allowing that to move into a lake or something like that. So in most places they have grasses growing in order to reduce the movement of water, and as the water flow slows down, some of that sediment settles down here, doesn't end up in a lake or a river or whatever, and accordingly some of the pollutants, nitrogen, phosphorus, and so that's the story there. But what I noticed was that whoever is maintaining that lawn was doing something very interesting. Do you see these little patches of grass, the clumps, you see that? Yeah. Anybody can tell me what those are? I mean, I was interested because it made everything looks a little bit better. It wasn't as boring looking type of a strip. I'm sorry?
Didn't he mow it crosshatch like they do on the baseball diamond?
You mean in terms of the, well, he did, but this area is actually taller grass. These are bunches of grasses, which made everything look a little bit more interesting instead of just flat. Any idea why he was doing that? Just for fun or just better looking? Trap more sediment, so basically you have different things. Yeah, there's actually some truth to that. And I thought maybe he was doing it that way. But I thought, well, if he was doing it that way, they could have used like a strip that way. In fact, that is one thing that we are doing in golf courses. We call them buffer zone. From the grass to the lake, we change the height of grass to slow down the movement. To help to direct the water, which means that the water comes over here, have a channel going like that. Why? We're just going to go there. No, I'm not, you know, that's good.
Erosion control?
Well, the grass itself does the erosion control anyways. Why does he have to? I thought about that, and you know what? I think, I never saw the guy or gal for that matter to see what he's doing it. I found out why he was doing it, and that's why I always talk as a tribute to that unknown person who was being a thinker. He would come and mow the lawn at say 4 inches one day, 1 week. Next week, or next 2 weeks, whenever it was, he would come and mow strips of lawn at 3 inches or 2 inches. So you see, every other week he would mow shorter or higher for that matter. And I did a quick mathematics things, and I found out that every other week he or she saves about 50% less time on mowing that lawn. Because the next time when he comes, he actually skipped 1 row of mowing. So the effect was actually interesting. It looks okay. It looks actually nicer than just a flat one. It gives you some visual effect. At the same time, he was saving 50% every other time, so about 1/3 time on mowing. Pretty impressive. It would be impressive anywhere but in Las Vegas, because that time that guy was sitting in that building and putting that coin. Any questions on mowing or anything else which some of you maybe, yes?
Does it matter if you mow the lawn in the same direction every week?
The question is, does it matter if you whether to mow the lawn in one direction every week or change the direction? It is always better to change the direction. Several reasons. Number one, if you go on the same path all the time, your mower tire will actually compact the soil, and very soon you will see this little alleyways, or ruts. You don't want to do that. Secondly, if you're going the same way after you mow the grass, the grass would lay one way or another, and you will eventually you will not get as much of a cut because the grass is just going to be laying pretty much like hairs for that matter, and therefore you won't get as clean of a cut. So altogether, it's always better to change your directions every which way, this way, that way, or an angle or something. It's much better. Yes?
In a swale like that, I have several swales like that. There's these seasonal creeks that go through.
Yes.
One of which is now mostly year-round. And so it just makes a sopping wet mess going through. But it's a floodway. It's
Yes.
required to be maintained. Is there a particular kind of grass that you can grow in those kinds of areas that will leave it looking more like a natural creek bed or something, and be better adapted to the
wet condition or something? Yeah. Well, I don't know about all plants, so you definitely want to check with your local nursery because there are some water-loving plants. There are some rushes and things like that you can include. But among these grasses, if you're going to be mowing it, tall fescue is actually a good choice. Because tall fescue is interesting, although it is the most heat tolerant and drought tolerant of all the cool season grasses. If the water is available, it can actually extract more water from the soil and transpire more.
Oh, okay.
So it will actually use more water if the water is available. And if it's not available, it's more drought tolerant, say bluegrass. And you can mow it taller too. But remember, it's not going to be enough to dry up the whole soil. It's just a little bit more. But you can definitely do very interesting gardening, wetland gardening, and there are quite a few books available and some of these new water-loving plants from nursery. But among grasses, I think tall fescue would be the best choice for a condition like that.
Does tall fescue, if you leave it to go long, look attractive like the pine fescue you were showing?
No, because what happens then it would look like many of these grasses on the hills that they are not mowed.
Oh, okay.
It's very open, kind of a grayish looking. But in a situation like that, you want it to look natural anyways. Plant some of that hard fescue, by the way, too, with it. Mix them together.
That's what I was wondering.
Yeah, and that would do okay.
Okay.
Thatch. Thatch is one of those things which kind of unique to turf grasses, although it can have thatch in ivy and almost all other ground covers. But in terms of management, in most cases we talk about thatch only in lawn management. In other ground covers, like ivy and others, you have a thatch, and the only reason you talk about it is if the thatch is harboring rodents of different type. But on turf grasses, we talk about this because it can have a major impact on how successful you are in maintaining a healthy lawn. First of all, let's find out what thatch is. In case you didn't know that, thatch is a layer of organic matter, dead or dying organic matter, which develops right between the soil surface and the green portion of the grass. It is consisted of primarily of roots, stems, rhizomes, and stolons. Some leaves, but not much. It's primarily the lignin-containing plant parts which contribute to thatch. And lignin, in case you're not familiar with the term, basically is wood. Lignin, wood, the woody part of the plant. And that will be again the stems, rhizomes, so on and so forth. Leaves, as long as you don't have that much clippings like a crop of hay on top, if you mow frequently, leaves do not contribute to thatch that much. Now, up to a certain thickness, thatch is fine. In fact, we want to have about 1/4 to 1/2 inch of thatch. It gives some resiliency to the lawn, makes it softer to walk on under extreme temperature conditions, too high or too low temperature. It kind of moderates or insulates the soil a little bit to some extent, and altogether it's fine. But in most cases, if you have more than about ½ an inch of thatch, then you can run into problems. And that is, I'm pretty sure those of you who have dealt with lawn and have dug some lawn and everything, you have noticed that kind of a brownish material, which is right kind of like a sponge, right below the green portion of the grass. The main problem we run into when we have a thick thatch layer is interference with normal water movement into, through, and the reverse from and into and from the soil. When you have a thatch layer, very much like if you have a sponge, or anytime in fact you have two different texture type of media, whether it's soil on top of sand, sand on top of soil, organic matter, in this case thatch, or lots of it, they interfere with water movement, because when you apply water to the top layer, if you don't have that layering, if you have just a soil, and it could be any soil, it could be clay soil, loam soil, sandy soil, as long as it's kind of a uniform texture, you apply water to the soil, it goes down at various rates, speed, depending on the texture. Some of it eventually drains out. The rest of it comes back up into the soil, from the soil, due to a process which is called what?
Evapotranspiration.
No, evapotranspiration would be evaporation would be the end result. But while water moves up in the soil, read my lips. Cap. You knew it. You just need a little push. Capillary action, which is caused by adhesion, cohesion, all those things. Just don't get too technical, but basically it wicks up. It's a wick action or capillary action. It is stronger in clay soil than is a sandy soil, but eventually some water will come up, and then when it comes to surface, then it goes up through evaporation or transpiration to plants. So there's a very nice movement up and down. Unfortunately, however, that thing changes when you have a totally different type of a layer on top of another layer. In this case, thatch. You apply water to the thatch, it goes down through the thatch, but when it hits this interface between thatch and the soil, it stops there. It doesn't go right through. Even if you have sand there, even if you have gravel, it will not go through. Sometimes hard to believe, but that's the case. It will stay there until that top layer is totally saturated. At that point, the hydraulic conductivity of that water in the thatch is high enough. In other words, water is heavy enough to push it through. And you can imagine having an inch of thatch like having an inch of a sponge. Those of us who wash dishes still with a sponge, we know, can hold lots of water. So you may be applying 30 minutes of water, based on that brochure, but all of it is going to stay in the thatch area. Very small amount is going to move into the soil below. And that's where all the roots are, or they should be. And if you have a big thick thatch layer, quite often you may not send enough water to the soil, the roots here will die, and everything will be growing the thatch, which is a kind of a synthetic medium. All the roots are there. On top of that, the thatch is going to stay moist for a very long time. It doesn't lose moisture, and creates a very nice damp environment again for what? Diseases, fungi. I would say, especially on bluegrass lawns, 8 out of 10 diseases I notice when I look at the profile, I notice there is a thick thatch layer present. So that needs to be dealt with, obviously. Anyone can guess what that picture shows?
Is that after it's been detached?
So you think it's a lawn after it has been detached? It's a lawn that has been cored, and they have not removed the cores. Some of it is, the light doesn't show it. It's uniform. There's nothing on the surface. Traffic, effect of traffic. Okay, I'm going to give you a hint. That is, those of you who play golf or you know golf, that's a tee area where you tee off.
I have one of this, and I play golf.
Oh, want to detach with a golf club.
Right? This is the grass, which has not been, or either the soil is probably too compacted and is not responding to nitrogen. In that case, actually, because there was a thatch layer. Sometimes some of these, especially slow-release fertilizers, you put on, they are tied up in the thatch area. They don't get down, or they don't get fast enough to the right area so the plant can pick them up. But areas where we have dethatched, but taking those divots out, after fertility, they respond very quickly. That's another reason we don't want to have too much thatch, because not only fertilizers, but also pesticides. If you're applying any insecticide, fungicide, or herbicide, if anything like that, they can actually, the thatch can hold up to those materials, and they may not affect the grass as much. The other thing regarding thatch is that most of the insects, either that cause damage to grass in California, they either live below the thatch or within the thatch. Those soil inhabiting ones, like white grubs and billbug grub, having a thick thatch layer, insecticides, if you are applying, may not be adequate, or you may not apply enough of it to pass through the thatch layer and get where they are to do any damage to them. That's one reason when we have billbug grub or white grub, the first thing I'd recommend people do de-thatching. And then others like cutworm, armyworm, sodweb worm, they actually live within the thatch. During the day, they live in the thatch. It's cold, it's cool, damp, dark. And at night, they crawl up, feed on the leaves, and they go down. So if you remove the thatch, in a way you have changed their habitat, and they will not be as effective. How many of you have tried to pull the thatch out using those rakes that is like that, or other, they call them thatch rakes?
Yes.
Have you?
Yeah.
Did you take much out?
Oh, yeah.
If you did, that's not thatch. Let's put it this way. If you take something out, that is not thatch. That's not one. Those are just loose leaves and everything. The actual thatch, you pretty much have to be a Hercules or something to move much of it out. And unfortunately, even if you take some out, you're pulling so much grass out, you're just ruining the grass. So I would not recommend those little, There's a machine which is called a de-thatcher, or a verticutter. You can rent from rental places. You don't need to buy one of those, by the way. We have enough stuff in our houses. Rent one of those. It works like a mower. It just happened that the blades are actually vertically driven instead of horizontal. If you look at the bottom of those, you'll notice the blades like that. And they come on different shapes, different sizes, different type of blades. As that moves forward, it cuts through and brings the thatch up on the surface, and of course you have to rake those out and throw them away. If you are dealing with Bermuda grass or Kentucky bluegrass and you are composting those things, guess what? You probably ought to spread them all over the place. So, because most of those are the stolons and rhizomes. Some of the grasses that we talked about that I don't recommend for home lawns is because they are heavy thatch producers. This was a fancy development in the East Bay area. That problem with this lawn, and of course we got involved, and they say no matter what we do, we have disease problems, it's always wet, and no matter how much fungicide we apply, nothing happens. And we went and looked, and of course they had some disease problem. They had about 4 inches of thatch growing.
Oh, wow.
That's why we don't recommend bent grasses for home lawns. They have a special place for most of the lawns like that. We can't mow them fast enough to basically keep that thatch development low. Oh, this was another one. That's kind of interesting. A few years ago, there's another condominium fancy development in Emeryville area. They called me up and said, well, we have this, and the area is very expensive and good landscaping, but their lawns were not doing so well, and these lawns were kind of islands all over the place. And they said that no matter what we do, they're always wet. We have to spray them with fungicide. Nobody likes to walk on them. It's just a mess. What can we do? Of course, I went there and found out that that was creeping bent grass, and that's the grass, as I mentioned, we use for what? Golf greens. They're mowed 3/16 of an inch every day. You know, even then they can produce thatch. But here, they were maintaining them as a home lawn. Probably because whoever they hired to maintain that which was probably on a bidding process, some cheap architect from Vermont or someplace, I don't know from where. I don't have anything against Vermont, by the way, just an example. From far away, not familiar with our conditions, who had heard that, yes, creeping banggrass is a little bit more salt tolerant, and this place is close to the bay, that would be good grass to grow there. They plant them, and most of gardeners, they're not familiar with that. So they're just maintaining like bluegrass and tall fescue. After 3 years, it was that much thatch. Obviously, it's going to stay wet all the time. I don't want to go and lie on that grass. It's wet all the time. It smells. And of course, disease and everything. So obviously, they didn't like to hear what I had to tell them, because take them all out, go something else. The good thing was that the gardener had a good sense of humor. I love this industry. Everybody has a good sense of humor. They say, well, I can't. People hate me for it. They don't want to walk on it. They don't want to even look at me because of my lawn. So the least I can do every time I mow, I put a different pattern on it. So at least when there was a high-rise next to it, when they look down, they see something pretty. So today was heart-shaped. Maybe it was close to Valentine. I don't know. Well, believe it or not, there's a new disease called mower blight. And mower blight can do so much damage to all the trees, and I always mention that. In that one, that's the same tree, by the way. Obviously, people are not paying attention, and this is just thinking, you know. Those barks, even in the large trees, are very sensitive. And sometimes I go to parks and other places, and I see this guy is driving a tank, going and he's so concerned to get as close as possible to that tree, because to get an inch of that is, you know, did you see that? I didn't leave a blade of grass. Big deal. In the meantime, kill the grass. So next time you see something like that, call the police. That guy is a criminal. No, be careful. Basically, what we recommend, especially in home lawn landscapes, don't get that close. You know, some of these weed eaters are much better. You know, unless the plant is very, very new, they can get very close, or use the walk behinds. Better yet, leave some of that grass just grow a little bit taller. You know, worst, you know, the best thing you can do is just prevent. That grass can be redone very quickly. Even if it dies, you just seed it. But that tree is not that simple. How many of you have used those weed cutters, by the way? Easy to work with, you know. Be careful, however, you know, sometimes they get so they're for grass. Can you imagine? If that's you, I've had a couple of beers, you do that, your wife comes, you did what? Questions on thatch?
Is there a time period on an average backyard lawn
To thatch. Good question. Timing for thatching. Again, you want to do that when the grass can recover from that injury as fast as possible. And that coincides with, again, the fall and the spring for cool season grasses, as I mentioned earlier, like the same time you fertilize. In fact, you can do your de-thatching and your fertilization afterward. And for warm season grasses, Bermuda grass, again, I think fall would be a good time to do it, because it can recover. But that reminds me of something else that I forgot to mention. Fortunately, thatch is not as much of a problem for us now as it was 10 years ago. For a very good reason. And that is that tall fescue, that God sent thing to us in California, does not produce as much thatch as other grasses. So if you have all tall fescue, for all practical purposes, you may not need to de-thatch at all. Unless you have been over-fertilizing or something. Most tall fescues will not produce that much thatch to require de-thatching. But if you have Bermuda grass and bluegrass, those two especially, and of course zoysia grass, then de-thatching is important. If it's all tall fescue, fortunately, it's not an issue. And the best way you can find out is to go and get your shovel and take some plant out like that and look at the side. And like this one, for example, doesn't have any thatch at all. And this is Bermuda grass. Don't worry about it. So that's a good thing. I'm glad you mentioned it, because that reminded me of that. Yes, sir?
The thatching rig that has two prongs on it that fits on a rotary mower?
They're kind of retrofit kits that they, yeah. Some of you may have seen in the market, there are these kits that you can buy and attach it to your rotary mower, and usually kind of two prongs at the end. And you know, I have a hard time I'm not comfortable recommending those. The reason is that most of those mowers were not designed. Remember, mower blade, the friction you get from cutting a blade of grass is different than trying to push those things out. If you have done it once, you know the amount of power required to do that. Unless the manufacturer actually recommends that for their machine. Whatever brand is, you buy a new one and they say, okay, you can install this kit and it would work, which obviously I assume that they have done the research and the engine can take that. I will not do that to my mower because with a very good chance I may burn the whole engine. It's just, or just the thing won't turn, depending on how much thatch you have. So I'm not comfortable recommending those. If you have it, you have done it, and you're comfortable, then hey, who cares what I think? You know, that's a different story. Okay, let's go to one last one, and that is aeration. Aeration. I know by the end of the day, you would say, if that's much work, I'm going to get rid of the lawn I already have. Who cares about that thing? Why am I going to?
Green concrete.
That's right. Yeah, it's much easy. That's right. Just spray it. But anyways, aeration. Grasses, like all other plants, they need water. We know that. They need fertilizer, food. We know that. But they also need oxygen, like all other organisms. It's very simple. And that oxygen is needed above ground as well as in the ground, underground. Why? I mean, if they can get the oxygen from the air, why do they need to have it in the soil? I mean, you and I, we have a mouth, you know, if we had another hole somewhere on here that we could get the oxygen, would it make any difference? No. Why do they have to have oxygen in the roots? Any idea? In fact, that's pretty much all plants, really. It's not only grasses. Somebody says roots something? Respiration. Yeah, the leaves do. Okay, it's good. In addition to the shoots, roots also do respiration. That's why they need oxygen in the soil. And when the oxygen amount in the soil or oxygen diffusion rate is slow, plants are under stress. Grasses, trees, shrubs, it doesn't make that much of a difference. A good example is that if you have a long-term flooding, some of those orchards around here, as you know, plants will die. Most of it is lack of oxygen. Now in grasses, that is a major problem because by design, we have lawns to walk on, to have activities on. Very few lawns are for ornamental purposes. And it is a perennial surface. You don't have annual tilling or plowing to fluff up the soil. Grass is always there. And that traffic pushes the soil particles together, compact the soil. There is not enough oxygen in the soil. And roots need respiration because it is respiration that takes the oxygen, and that oxygen oxidizes or burns the food in the roots, and that produces energy, and that energy is being used to absorb more nutrients. When you don't have enough oxygen, there's no respiration, roots are wilting, they're not functioning, plants cannot pick up the nitrogen which you have applied. In fact, we see that quite often, especially on sports fields, where all this gladiator come and do all their activities on it. And of course, what happens is that the soil is compacted, whether they are big gladiators or little ones, male, female, it doesn't make that much of a difference. They compact the soil, and there's not. And of course, when the soil is compacted, water does not get in, air does not get in, and if those two are not going in, obviously nutrient is not getting in, and eventually grass suffers and goes down. Since we cannot do what most farmers and orchardists and other landscapers do, which is you can go and plow and till the soil and add organic matter every year and fluff up the soil and get them ready. Well, we can do that, but not many people want to do that to their lawn every year. We have other systems to deal with that. We aerify the soil. And there are at least 24 different methods to do it, at least, maybe more. Simply, you can slice them. There's a machine called a slicer. You go through the lawn and make these long slices, grooves into the lawn, and they allow for water movement and so on in the lawn. And disruption is very low. But most effective way, especially for home lawns, is what we do, we call core aeration. Again, there are probably a dozen different type of machine that they make a special kind of a coring. Principle is the same. They have these hollow tines, some of them solid, that as the machine goes forward, those cores go down into the soil, and they remove these cores of soil out, leave them on the surface, and of course each one of those channels allow air and water movement into the soil. The more traffic you have, the more compaction you'll have, and the more aerification you have to do. Okay? It has to be a part of an effective management program. In a home situation, your front lawn probably will never need aeration at all, because most front lawns don't get much traffic, only when you're mowing, and it's not a big deal. A backyard lawn, depending on how many kids you have, how many dogs you have, and how many games of volleyball you do every week, and how many barbecues you have, depending on how much you use it, then you may have to do aeration to constantly relieve that compaction. And it has to be a part of the management while the grass is healthy. And most people don't do that. They always wait until the grass is almost dead. Up at this point is okay. But when you get to this point, a little bit too late. There's not much to do. Or sometimes I get calls from friends, Ali, you told us aerify, and then they're talking about parks. Nothing happened. Of course nothing is going to happen. There's one grass here, one grass there. Everything else is dead. Just because you have a little hole here, quarter of an inch deep, as though tomorrow everything is going to magically green up. It's not going to happen. Dead is dead. It's gone. It's not going to come up. So, don't wait until things are gone. Oh, we aerified. Nothing happened. At that time, do what farmers do, and it's going to be very effective. Kill everything, till them all up, add organic matter, reseed or resod. Sometimes I go to parks or other places, and they do aeration. Most of the park systems. And for those park friends who may hear this, I'm just saying this as a joke. Please don't get mad at me. At about 2:30 or something, I see this guy driving this tractor at like 30, 40 miles an hour. And that aerifier is just jumping up and down, going all over the place and everything. We are aerifying, He's not even looking, because at 2 o'clock he's going to leave or something. You go and look at those holes. There's this big hole, basically like divots on tees, All we are doing there is making nice, beautiful seed beds for all those weed seeds. They love them for that. Do it again. Anyways, I hope what I have to share with you would help you to be a little bit more friendly to your lawns, gentler, and be a little bit more positive, spend a little bit more time, and hopefully you will have a good stand of grass for you, for your neighbors, and that's it. Thank you very much. Thank you.
The preceding program was part 2 of 2 parts, each 90 minutes long. There is support material available at this website, including quizzes, handouts, and lecture outlines for all presentations. Consult the UCTV programming guide for the date and time that other lectures in the series will be shown.
It's the definitive guide to gardening, produced by the University of California. The California Master Gardener Handbook contains over 700 pages of in-depth information on topics such as soil, fertilizer and water management, plant propagation, weeds and pests, lawn care, landscape design, home vegetable gardening, and the wide variety of garden crops that are grown in the Golden State. The chapters in this handbook provide helpful information on selecting varieties, planting, growth cycles, pruning, irrigation, and harvesting. The California Master Gardener Handbook is available along with other gardening publications on the A&R Catalog website at anrcatalog.ucdavis.edu.